The unexpected prisoner. The cold, metallic walls of the prison cell seemed to close in on Gaian Reed. The fluorescent lights flickered erratically above, casting a pale, almost sickly glow across the space. For 2 years, this had been his home. An isolation of steel, shadows, and silence. Once a captain of the Shadowblade Reconnaissance Corps, Gaian had been a man who traveled the stars, commanding missions of vital importance. Now he was nothing more than a prisoner on the barren, distant planet Karis 9, surrounded by nothing but the ghosts of his past. The charges against him had been heavy: treason, conspiracy, and even murder. He had been framed, a mere pawn in a political game that played out beyond his comprehension. Yet, here he was, abandoned by his allies, and left to rot in a prison built to break the spirit of even the most hardened criminals. Sitting on the metal cot, his back hunched, his eyes locked onto the cold wall before him, Gaian's mind wandered to the past. The betrayal had cut deeper than any blade. He had lost everything: his rank, his crew, his name. No longer a man of purpose, Gaian was reduced to a shadow of who he had once been. His thoughts were interrupted by the hum of distant machinery, and then the soft but unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching down the narrow corridor. A deep, cynical chuckle escaped him. A new batch of prisoners, or maybe they've come to finally execute me. He couldn't care less. There was no escaping this place, no redemption to be found. The world outside was as cold and unforgiving as the cell he inhabited. But just as he resigned himself to his fate, the unmistakable screech of metal against metal echoed down the hall, the sound of a door opening. Then the sound of footsteps stopped, replaced by the clattering of something heavy being dragged across the floor. Curiosity tugged at him. He hadn't heard anyone arrive in the past week. It wasn't like they were bringing him a meal or company. The guards had long given up on making small talk. He glanced up toward the door and saw 2 burly prison guards dragging something, or someone, into the cell. A piece of junk. One guard snorted, his tone dripping with disdain. The other guard grunted in agreement, clearly unimpressed with the newcomer. The object, or rather the form, was a female android, its synthetic skin a gleaming white that contrasted starkly with the grim surroundings. As the guards shoved it unceremoniously into the cell, a loud metallic clang echoed through the room. The android's body was still, lifeless even, its long, flowing white hair cascading over the edges of its pale face. Gaian stood up slowly, his military instincts taking over. As his boots hit the cold metal floor, a sharp pain shot through his ankle. He ignored it and limped towards the strange figure. The android's face was unnervingly perfect, like it had been sculpted by a master artisan, and yet there was something oddly broken about it. A crack ran across its chest, exposing wires and damaged components, the evidence of some violent collision or purposeful destruction. "What's this?" Gaian muttered under his breath, crouching down next to the still android. He reached out to touch it, his fingers brushing against the smooth surface. Suddenly, without warning, the android's eyes snapped open. A sharp gasp escaped Gaian as he pulled his hand back, startled. For a moment, he was locked in a silent gaze with the mechanical being, its silver eyes glowing with an intensity that caught him off guard. "Are you Gaian Reed?" The android's voice was soft, almost melodic, an odd contrast to its emotionless features. Gaian blinked in surprise, caught off guard by the question. "Who's asking?" He growled, his voice laced with suspicion. His hand instinctively went to his belt, where he had hidden a sharp piece of metal, his only means of defense in this forsaken place. The android's head tilted slightly, and it straightened up, its movements smooth and deliberate. "I am Lita," it replied. "I was sent by the king of Taris to find you." Taris, Gaian echoed, the name stirring something in his mind. The planet of Taris was once a familiar place, his home, or rather, where his home had been. He had no reason to expect any help from his planet now, especially not after the way they had abandoned him. "I haven't heard from Taris in years." "What does the king want with me?" Gayen's voice turned cold as the bitter taste of disillusionment clouded his words. Leia's expression remained stoic, but her gaze softened just slightly. "His daughter has been kidnapped. Princess Alexia. He needs your help to rescue her." At the mention of Alexia's name, Gayen's chest tightened. The young princess, with her fiery red hair and emerald green eyes, had once been the only person who had believed in his innocence when the whole galaxy had turned its back on him. Alexia wasn't just a princess to him. She was a symbol of everything he had lost. He gritted his teeth, frustration and anger rising within him. "What happened to her?" he asked, his voice hoarse with emotion. Leia took a step closer, her cold, metallic frame gleaming under the harsh lights. "We don't know the details, but we believe she is being held by a faction of mercenaries who are demanding a ransom from the king. He has no choice but to turn to you for help. You are the only one who can retrieve her." Galen's mind raced, torn between the new, raw anger and his own fear of getting involved in another impossible mission. But deep down, he knew the truth. He had to save Alexia, not just because of duty, but because she had once saved him. "All right," Gayen said after a long, tense pause. "Let's do this. I'm getting out of this hellhole." The plan of escape. The cold, metallic walls of Karis 9's prison complex loomed around Gayen, enclosing him in a world of shadows and sterile silence. But now, the air around him felt different. There was an undeniable shift in the atmosphere, something far more dangerous and more hopeful than what he had felt in the past 2 years. He wasn't alone anymore. The android, Leia, had transformed in his eyes from just another prisoner in a cage to a lifeline, a chance for redemption. Leia's transformation had been remarkable. When she first arrived, she had appeared to be a broken, damaged shell of an android, a piece of discarded technology. Now, as she stood beside him, her synthetic skin flowing seamlessly to heal the damage, and her eyes glowing with an unnatural blue light, Gayen saw her for what she truly was, an advanced being capable of so much more than any human or artificial intelligence he had ever encountered. "Do you know where we start?" Gayen asked, his voice low but determined. Leia didn't answer immediately, her glowing eyes scanning their surroundings. The harsh fluorescent lighting above flickered once more, casting a dull, almost haunting glow across the corridor. Her fingers, now elongated and sharp, almost like blades, brushed the surface of the metal wall with a soft wire. Gayen could sense her processing the environment, calculating their best course of action. "We begin with the locks," she said, her voice steady, unwavering. "The prison system here is designed to keep people in, not keep them out. The guards are lax, believing there's no way for anyone to escape. We will use that underestimation to our advantage." Gayen, who had spent countless hours analyzing the security system, nodded in agreement. "I've learned all their shifts. There's one breach we can exploit, but we'll need a distraction." Leia's expression remained unreadable, but her body shifted ever so slightly, a sign that she was processing the idea. "You're right. I can create one," she said, her lips curving slightly as she adjusted her stance. "But it will require precision, and it will require you to move quickly." The weight of the situation settled heavily in Gayen's chest. He had known this would be a dangerous endeavor, but now the reality of it was settling in. There was no turning back. If they failed, they would die. But if they succeeded, if they could escape, then they would have a chance to rescue Alexia, the princess. "Let's move," he said, the finality in his voice making it clear that he wasn't going to waste time. With practiced ease, they moved through the halls of the prison. Gayen had spent enough time here to learn every corner, every shadowed alcove, and every weak spot in the security system. The guards knew him too well, and so they had let their guard down, assuming he was no longer a threat. Leia, in her metallic form, was invisible to them. She was a perfect distraction in the shadows, moving in a way that didn't seem human at all. As they approached the central security hub, Gayen motioned for Leia to take a step back. He needed to be sure of their escape route. He had one chance to blow the lock on the cell door without causing too much chaos. The plan was to detonate a small charge that would allow them to slip out unnoticed. But there were variables that could go wrong. The guards, the cameras, and the timing. "Ready?" he whispered to Leia, who nodded without hesitation. A surge of adrenaline hit his bloodstream. The sound of his breath was loud in his ears as he crouched in front of the thick metal door, feeling the cool surface against his fingertips. He placed the charge against the lock mechanism, his heart racing with every passing second. He double-checked his timing, his military precision kicking in. Once the charge was set, there would be no going back. Leia, watching him intently, didn't flinch. She stood like a sentinel, her eyes glowing brighter as she prepared to take action once the explosion went off. The distraction would be set in motion as soon as the door was breached. Gayan took a deep breath and pressed the button. The explosion was soft, controlled, almost silent. There was no blaring siren or immediate blast of noise. Just the quiet thud of metal breaking, the subtle vibrations traveling through the floor. For a split second, everything felt like it was suspended in time. Then the door slid open. The alarm, however, was delayed. The security system was designed to react in real time, but the charge had been expertly timed to slow its response. "Go!" Gayan barked, already sprinting down the corridor, moving like a ghost in the dim light. Leia, her enhanced agility allowing her to move silently and faster than any human could, followed closely behind, her fingers ready to strike. They rounded corners and slipped past guards, avoiding the security cameras and their constant surveillance. Gayan's heart pounded in his chest as he moved with purpose, his mind focused solely on getting out, getting to the princess. Every step they took brought them closer to the prison's outermost walls, where their only hope of escape lay. But there were still obstacles to overcome. At any moment, a patrol could appear, and the alarms would be raised. The guards would know they were no longer contained. But Gayan wasn't about to stop now. The stakes were too high, not just for him, but for Alexia, for Taris. He turned to Leia, his eyes reflecting determination. "We're almost there. Stay with me." Leia nodded silently, her expression impassive as always, but there was something in her eyes now, a glimmer of resolve. They were in this together, and failure was no longer an option. The outer walls of Keris 9. The metal walls of Keris 9 seemed to close in as Gayan and Leia sprinted down the narrow, dimly lit corridors. The hum of the lights above was constant, but in the silence that surrounded them, it felt as if the sound of their footsteps echoed louder with each passing moment. The harsh clang of the prison's steel construction reverberated in his chest, a constant reminder of the cold, unforgiving place they were trying to escape. The distant, muffled sounds of alarms were growing fainter now, their escape moving further from detection. The plan had been simple enough. Breach the cell door, neutralize the guards, and then slip through the security checkpoint. But as they neared the outer walls of the prison, Gayan's heart rate spiked once again. He had no illusions about the dangers they were about to face. The final stretch would test their skills and wits like never before. Galen had seen the outer walls many times from his prison cell. He had studied them meticulously, and every corner of the exterior had been logged in his mind. But now, with the stench of fear still fresh in his lungs, he knew that no amount of planning could guarantee success. "Leia," Gayan whispered, pulling her aside into a shadowed alcove. His voice was low, urgent. "We're almost there. We need to move fast. Once we reach the security gate, we'll be in the open. If we're spotted—" "I know," she interrupted quietly, her tone resolute. "We will make it. Trust me." Gayan looked at her, searching her face, though it remained cold and unreadable. Her synthetic blue skin seemed to glow under the low lights, her features sharp, like a predator, beautiful, lethal, and untouchable. But beneath the flawless exterior, there was something else. He could see it in her movements, the way she hesitated for a fraction of a second whenever she made a decision. It was the first sign of humanity he had seen in her. "I'm not worried about you," Galen muttered. "I'm worried about me." Leia tilted her head slightly, the faintest hint of amusement in her gaze. "We're not worried about you, Galen. We're worried about getting you out of here alive." Her words, though meant to calm him, only tightened the knot in his stomach. There was no more time to waste. Their plan was fragile, and every moment spent delaying was one more step closer to capture. He had no doubt that if they failed, they would never leave Karis 9 alive. The consequences were far too great for the prison to let them escape without a fight. With a nod of resolve, Galen slipped from the alcove, signaling Leia to follow him. They moved swiftly through the hallways, their footsteps almost silent against the steel floor. As they reached the final hallway that led to the exterior airlock doors, Galen felt the cold air rush through the cracks in the walls, a stark reminder of the harsh world that lay beyond. But it wasn't just the cold he felt. It was the weight of the decision hanging over them. Every guard, every laser turret, every camera set to detect and destroy. The outer security gate was their final obstacle. If they could breach the walls, they would be free. But that was a big if. Galen slowed his pace as they neared the checkpoint, taking a moment to survey the area ahead. The walls were lined with armed guards, each standing at attention with weapons drawn. The camera feeds above them blinked steadily, unmoving. There were no signs of immediate danger, but Galen knew better than to trust the stillness. The security here was tighter than anything they had encountered. He counted at least 6 guards positioned along the perimeter. Leia's hand moved to her side as if instinctively, and Galen watched as she pulled a sleek, black device from a compartment on her arm. It was a standard model android hacking tool, but for Leia, it was more than that. She wasn't just any android. She had been made to adapt, to overcome. And right now, that made her their best chance at survival. "What do we do?" Galen asked, though he had a feeling he already knew the answer. Leia's eyes were focused, her expression hardening into something fierce and resolute. She slid the tool into place, and with a soft hum, a thin blue light spread across the area, sweeping over the guards and systems. Within seconds, the sounds of the camera and laser turrets ceased to be heard. "They won't notice us," Leia said, her voice steady. "Not unless we get too close. We have time. Take it." Galen exhaled slowly, the tension in his body starting to ease, if only for a moment. He stepped toward the airlock doors and adjusted his stance, ready for whatever was to come next. The sounds of his heartbeat were louder than the noise around them. His fingers tightened around the handle of the weapon he had managed to smuggle in, a small blaster, nothing compared to the firepower the guards wielded. But in a pinch, it could be enough. They moved in sync, Galen leading the way, and Leia, always silent and graceful, just a step behind. As they approached the security checkpoint, the world around them seemed to shift, the distance between them and freedom closing with every passing second. The first guard came into view. He was positioned behind a thick pillar, his weapon pointed downward as he checked a data pad in his hand. Galen motioned to Leia, who silently approached the pillar from the other side, her movements precise and calculated. A sharp, quiet motion, and the guard crumpled silently to the ground without a sound. Galen didn't have time to think. He moved past the fallen guard and positioned himself by the airlock door, where the final barrier stood between them and their escape. The locks were heavy, the mechanisms complex, but Leia was already on it. She knelt down and inserted her tool into the terminal at the base of the door. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, with a soft, almost imperceptible click, the door slid open, revealing the cold expanse of the barren landscape beyond. Galen could hear the wind howling across the dry ground, the dust and sand swirling in the atmosphere. It felt almost surreal, as if they had crossed some invisible line between life and death. But there was no time to celebrate, no time for hesitation. They had made it this far, but their enemies weren't far behind. Without another word, they rushed through the door. The moment the airlock sealed shut behind them, Galen heard the familiar sound of the prison alarms blaring. The system had detected the breach. The countdown to capture had begun. Leia grabbed his arm, pulling him towards a narrow passage in the rocky terrain beyond the walls. "Keep moving," she said, her voice edged with urgency. Galen could barely catch his breath. But one thing was clear: this was far from over.